You thought animated movies were just harmless fun, right? Think again. The 1960s saw censors lose their minds over cartoons that dared to get weird, political, or just a little too wild for comfort. From psychedelic fever dreams to anti-authoritarian bombshells, these films didn't just push boundaries, they obliterated them. So which tunes got the boot, and why were nervous adults so terrified of a little ink and paint? Stick around. Some of these bands are so bizarre, you won't believe number 2. Yellow Submarine, 1968. Let's kick off with a film that looked like a kaleidoscope exploded onto the screen and changed animation forever. Yellow Submarine. On the surface, it's a colorful Beatles adventure. Underneath, it's a psychedelic Trojan horse loaded with enough anti-establishment attitude to make government censors sweat bullets. Picture it, the world's most famous band tripping their way through Pepperland to save the day, armed with nothing but music, love, and enough groovy colors to give your grandma a headache. But here's what freaked out the grown-ups. Yellow Submarine wasn't just about singing cartoon mop-tops. It was a thinly veiled rebellion against authority, an animated acid trip that dared to imagine a world where creativity triumphs over bland conformity. Eastern Bloc countries like East Germany and parts of the Soviet Union slammed the submarine's hatch shut, banning it for subversive content and fear it would ignite countercultural unrest. Even some South American regimes saw danger in its dreamy optimism, while conservative critics in the West whispered that it promoted drug use, as if seeing flying blue meanies would send kids to the nearest dealer. The real crime? The film's wild, free-spirited art style practically redefined what animation could be, inspiring a generation to get weird and to question authority. The censors could try to keep it locked away, but you can't unsee the Yellow Submarine once it's surfaced. If a talking apple can help save the world, maybe it's time the adults stop worrying so much. And for every door they slammed, this film just found another window to slip through. Banned? Sure. Forgotten? Not a chance. The Magic Roundabout Dooall and the Blue Cat, 1965-1970. Hold on to your hats. Here's a movie that made censors lose their minds, all because a talking dog and a blue cat looked a little too suspicious for the Cold War crowd. The Magic Roundabout, known in France as Dooall and the Blue Cat, was no ordinary children's movie. It was a masterclass in subversive storytelling, stuffed to the brim with political satire, hiding in plain sight. You think censors don't watch cartoons? Think again. In the Soviet Union and parts of Eastern Europe, the government took one look at Doogal's adventures and saw an allegory for totalitarianism. The Blue Cat, with his creepy obsession with control and order, became an accidental stand-in for the big bad state. Suddenly, what should have been a harmless, trippy romp through a fantasy garden became a coded call to resist authority, at least in the minds of paranoid officials. The banhammer dropped. Soviet censors accused the film of spreading dangerous ideas about individuality and rebellion. Some claimed the story could sow seeds of discord among impressionable children. Meanwhile, the West was loving the movie's surreal humor and gentle digs at power. Ironically, by banning it, the authorities only boosted its cult status among young, curious viewers. Bootleg tapes spread like wildfire, making Dooall and the Blue Cat a forbidden classic for every kid with a contrarian streak. So what's the lesson here? Sometimes a silly cartoon about a garden and a cat can rattle more cages than any big-budget drama. You won't believe number 2 got banned, but when you see how nervous grown-ups can get over a few clever jokes, you might start seeing those cartoon flowers in a whole new light. Next time you watch a children's film, check for subversive undertones. The censors sure did. The Little Mermaid Soviet, 1968. Forget everything you know about Disney's bubbly Ariel. The Soviet version of The Little Mermaid is the kind of animated fairy tale that makes parents clutch their pearls and censors reach for the red pen. Released in 1968, this adaptation stuck much closer to Hans Christian Andersen's original story. Moody, tragic, and absolutely haunting. And apparently, that was just too much honesty for some countries to handle. Here's what sent censors running. This children's movie dives headfirst into existential dread, heartbreak, and loss. The visuals are surreal and sometimes downright unsettling, trading musical numbers for bleak landscapes and quiet despair. There's no singing crab, no happy ending, just a mermaid who sacrifices everything, only to dissolve into sea foam for love that's never returned. In a world of happily ever afters, this was an emotional gut punch. Eastern European states like Czechoslovakia and Hungary banned the film, calling it psychologically damaging for children. In other words, they didn't want kids growing up knowing life can be rough. dreams can shatter, and sometimes the villain wins. Soviet critics even debated if the film was too dark for grown-ups. Meanwhile, the animation's stark, almost expressionist visuals only added to the sense of doom, making it a cult hit among art students and night owls. But here's the kicker. The film's honesty about pain, loss, and unrequited love has earned it legendary status. Some call it a masterpiece. Others say it's the best animated heartbreak you'll ever see. Either way, it was too much for the censors, but just right for viewers tired of sugarcoating reality. Want a fairy tale that actually feels like real life? This is it. Just don't expect any singing lobsters. Surugat The Substitute, 1961. Imagine an animated short so sharp, so subversive, that it gave communist censors the cold sweats. Enter Surugat, or The Substitute, a Yugoslavian cartoon that doesn't look like a political firebomb at first glance, until you dig a little deeper. On the surface, it's a quirky, dialogue-free romp about a man on a beach, inflating everything he needs: a chair, a woman, even a car. But beneath the slapstick, pure satire. The Substitute was a razor-edge jab at modern consumerism and the emptiness of convenience culture. Our hero floats through life by blowing up inflatable everything, but none of it lasts. Things deflate, collapse, or float away, leaving him and the audience to wonder if anything in modern life is real or meaningful. In a world obsessed with conformity and shallow comfort, this was basically an act of rebellion. It was a huge hit at Western festivals, even winning an Oscar for Best Animated Short. But behind the Iron Curtain, Surugat was quickly labeled anti-communist propaganda. Authorities in Poland and parts of the USSR banned it, afraid the message was a little too close for comfort. Maybe the brave new world they were building was just a bunch of hot air. Bootleg screenings thrived, of course. Nothing makes a film cooler than telling people they can't watch it. Artists and students in Belgrade whispered about its hidden meanings, and it became a calling card for rebellious animators. The irony? The film's universal message about loneliness and fake happiness rings truer today than ever. Maybe those censors should have inflated their sense of humor instead. Heaven and Earth Magic, 1962. Get ready for a detour into the weirdest corner of the 1960s animation underground. Heaven and Earth Magic isn't just a movie, it's a hallucination with a runtime. Created by experimental filmmaker Harry Smith, this collage-style cutout animation was so bizarre that even the most open-minded censors didn't know what to do with it. But plenty of them decided the safest option was to ban it outright. What's it about? Good luck figuring that out in one sitting. The film is a fever dream of dancing fruit, flying teeth, magical transformations, and surreal rituals, all set to a jarring soundtrack of found sounds and electronic noise. Smith reportedly edited it while on amphetamines, and it shows. When it debuted in New York's underground scene, art lovers hailed it as a masterpiece of psychedelic cinema. But when it tried to go mainstream, especially in conservative US states and parts of Europe, the backlash was immediate. Censors called it obscene, blasphemous, and potentially dangerous to impressionable viewers. Some church groups even protested screenings, claiming it was satanic, never mind the lack of any coherent plot or dialogue. The real issue? The film didn't just ignore the rules of storytelling, it took a flamethrower to them. In a decade obsessed with conformity and moral clarity, this was a nightmare wrapped in celluloid. But if you love the strange, the daring, or the utterly inexplicable, Heaven and Earth Magic is a badge of honor. Sure, it got banned, but it also changed the conversation about what animation could be. And honestly, if a movie this weird didn't upset a few censors, would it really be worth watching? Animal Farm, 1954, but banned throughout the 1960s in China and Eastern Europe. Now before you scream, that's not the 60s. Hang on, Animal Farm is the animated political grenade that refused to die, and its censorship footprint in the 1960s is legendary. Picture this: George Orwell's biting novel turned into a feature-length cartoon. You'd think a movie with talking pigs and singing animals would be a safe Saturday morning watch, right? Wrong. This was no happy barnyard romp. This was subversion with a snout. Created in Britain with secret CIA funding, yeah, for real, Animal Farm turned Orwell's anti-totalitarian fable into a global hot potato. In the West, it was a Cold War trophy, shown to prove the dangers of authoritarianism. But in Maoist China, in the Soviet Union, even satellite states like East Germany and Hungary, this cartoon was a red flag, literally. banned, denounced, and erased from theaters, schools, and libraries. The official excuse? Anti-communist propaganda designed to rot young minds. Chinese censors went nuclear. They saw Napoleon the Pig as a veiled attack on Mao himself. And the ending, a brutal, cynical triumph of tyranny, was a lesson no party official wanted kids internalizing. In East Germany, screenings could get you in trouble with the Stasi. Bootleg copies became black market treasures, and whispered screenings took on an almost cult-like vibe, with students and young activists reading between every animated line. What's the legacy? Animal Farm is a shining example of how cartoons can terrify dictators, even decades after they premiere. When your film is so spicy it gets you blacklisted across half the globe years after release, you know you've struck a nerve. Turns out, animation can bite a lot harder than live action ever could. Don't believe cartoons can change the world? Just ask any regime that's tried and failed to keep Animal Farm out of sight. The Snow Queen 1957, blacklisted in 1960s. Ready for a frosty tale of censorship? Say hello to The Snow Queen, a breathtaking Russian adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale that melted hearts everywhere except Francoist Spain. Here, Soviet wasn't just a label, it was a flashing red warning sign. In the 1960s, anything with a whiff of red was public enemy number one, and The Snow Queen's magical journey was no exception. On the surface, this is a visually stunning film. Sweeping snowscapes, a hauntingly regal villainess, and enough icy peril to keep Elsa up at night. But for General Franco's paranoid censors, the real chill was political. Soviet culture was considered an infectious disease, and the Snow Queen, regardless of how innocently it presented itself, was seen as a subversive import. Spain slammed the door, locking the film out of theaters, schools, and even private clubs. The official line? The story was spiritually corrosive, and the Queen's icy grip on the land was an allegory for communist expansion. Never mind that Andersen wrote the tale in Denmark. In practice, banning the movie was about keeping out all things Russian, pure and simple. Ironically, the film thrived in the rest of Europe, winning awards and charming children across the Iron Curtain. Spanish families who could get their hands on foreign tapes treasured the movie as a secret window into another world. For some, it was their first taste of Soviet art, delivered in the form of enchanted mirrors and sleigh rides. And the punchline? Franco's censors might have kept the snow out, but they couldn't keep the story from warming the hearts of those who found it. It's proof that even the iciest bans can't freeze a great fairy tale for good. The Belladonna of Sadness, 1969, released 1973, but banned on sight. Let's dial up the scandal. Japan's The Belladonna of Sadness isn't just an animated film, it's a full-blown acid trip of sex, violence, and blasphemy, wrapped in psychedelic watercolors and whisper-thin metaphors. The production wrapped in 1969, but the movie was so radioactive that censors everywhere refused to let it see daylight. In Japan, it languished on the shelf for years. When it finally surfaced at foreign festivals, it was instantly banned or censored in half a dozen countries. What's the big deal? Try witchcraft, explicit sexuality, and an unapologetically adult critique of patriarchal power. The story follows Jean, a peasant woman who's sexually assaulted by a feudal lord and then transforms, through trauma, magic, and a deal with the devil, into a symbol of feminist resistance. The film's visuals are pure fever dream, drifting ink drawings, wild pop art explosions, and sensual hallucinations that leave Disney spinning in his grave. In conservative Japan, the censors freaked. Obscenity, anti-family values, and disturbing content topped the official ban list. Abroad, French, German, and American censors doubled down, calling it pornographic and morally degenerate. Film reels were seized, screenings shut down, and the legend of Belladonna only grew. Today, it's hailed as a lost masterpiece, a psychedelic feminist bombshell that was decades ahead of its time. But in the late 1960s and early 70s, this movie was enemy number one for anyone who thought animation was just for kids. Banned? Absolutely. Forgotten? Not a chance. Sometimes the most dangerous movies are the ones that refuse to be silenced. The Flying Phantom Ship 1969. Next stop, the high seas of controversy. The Flying Phantom Ship sounds like the title of a zany kid's adventure, but this Toei animation classic had Western censors sweating bullets. Why? Try giant robots, ruthless corporations, and a storyline that punches authority right in the face, plus more political subtext than your average primetime drama. The plot? Young Hayato's parents are killed by a mysterious monster, leading him into a conspiracy of megalomaniac industrialists, corrupt officials, and a ghostly ship piloted by a secretive hero. The visuals are explosive. Think robot sharks, destruction on a city-wide scale, and a finale that looks like Godzilla met the Matrix in a blender. But beneath the mayhem is a sharp dig at unchecked capitalism and government cover-ups. For 1960s Japan, this was already edgy. But when the film tried to make port in the US and Western Europe, American and British distributors called it inappropriate for children, citing disturbing violence, political radicalism, and a general refusal to play nice with authority. In some countries, local officials accused the movie of being anti-Western propaganda. In the US South, some TV stations flat out refused to air it, afraid the wild visuals and anti-establishment message would corrupt the youth. But here's the punchline. The Flying Phantom ship became a secret favorite for a generation of rebel-minded kids, smuggled in on imported VHS tapes and whispered about at anime clubs. The more the grown-ups tried to shut it down, the more irresistible it became. Who knew giant robot fish could be so revolutionary? Tintin and the Temple of the Sun, 1969. Think a Belgian boy reporter could get himself banned? Welcome to Tintin and the Temple of the Sun, the animated adaptation of Hergé's world-famous comics and the center of a censorship storm in Latin America. If you thought Tintin's biggest enemies were the baddies he chases around the globe, think again. Sometimes it's the censors who come after him hardest. Here's what happened. The movie follows Tintin, Captain Haddock, and the gang to Peru, where they encounter ancient Incan rituals, lost treasures, and more booby traps than an Indiana Jones fever dream. Sounds like a blast, unless you're Peruvian or Ecuadorian, where local governments took one look at the film and declared it an insult to their national identity. Distorted history, offensive to indigenous people, cultural imperialism. The list of complaints got longer than Captain Haddock's swear dictionary. Authorities banned the movie from cinemas, yanked it off TV schedules, and pressured neighboring countries to follow suit. In some places, protests broke out outside theaters, rare for an animated film. But here, the wounds ran deep. The filmmakers insisted it was all in good fun, but the critics weren't buying it. To them, the cartoon's depiction of Incan culture was cartoonish, pun intended, and disrespectful. But here's the twist. While it was banned in some countries, the controversy made it a must-see in others. Kids who managed to score a bootleg copy got a taste of forbidden adventure, plus a lesson in just how seriously adults can take their cartoons. Who knew Tintin could cause more diplomatic drama than an actual UN summit? Asterex The Gaul, 1967. Who could have guessed that France's favorite cartoon rebel would get himself banned? But that's exactly what happened to Asterex The Gaul. On the surface, it's a rollicking comedy about tiny villagers resisting Roman occupation using brains, brawn, and a suspiciously magical potion. But try screening it under a dictatorship, and suddenly, it's a threat to national security. Portugal under Salazar was a hotbed for censorship, and mocking authority wasn't exactly on the approved viewing list. When Asterix and Obelix gleefully outsmarted the Roman occupiers and poked fun at corrupt leaders, Portuguese officials lost their sense of humor fast. The film was quietly shelved and never given a proper run, its clever digs at tyranny deemed too spicy for public consumption. It wasn't just the Portuguese. Some Middle Eastern censors blacklisted Asterex the Gaul for its magic, wild slapstick, and irreverent attitude toward rulers and traditions. Even outside the iron grip of censorship, there were whispers about whether this silly cartoon was planting the seeds of revolution in young minds. The irony? While the film was muzzled in some countries, it thrived elsewhere, turning Asterix into a global hero for kids who liked their underdogs loud and proud. And let's be real, there's nothing like a ban to make a movie twice as legendary. When your slapstick gets you blacklisted, you know you're doing something right. The Adventures of Prince Akmed, 1926, but banned through the 1960s in Middle Eastern states. Let's go way back, but with a twist. The Adventures of Prince Akmed is the oldest surviving animated feature in the world, but it still managed to get itself banned in the 1960s. Why? Because the 1960s in the Middle East were not friendly to anything that even hinted at magic, pagan gods, or revealing costumes, no matter how historic or artistic. Lotte Reiniger's 1926 silhouette masterpiece was still being shown at film festivals and on TV during the 1960s until religious authorities in Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries pulled the plug. The reason? Pagan content, sorcery, and offensive attire, translation, flowing gowns, and fairy wings. Suddenly, what was lauded as an artistic milestone in the West became cultural dynamite in the Middle East. Ironically, the film's fairy tale wonder and jaw-dropping animation were exactly what made it irresistible for banned video collectors. Secret screenings continued in basements and private homes, because when you tell people a story is forbidden, you can bet they'll want to see it twice as badly. The lesson? You can try to ban magic, but you'll never ban curiosity. And if Prince Akmed taught us anything, it's that a little rebellion makes a fairy tale go a long way. La Planète Sauvage Fantastique Planète, 1960 Festivals. Think animated films are only for the Saturday morning crowd? La Planète Sauvage Fantastic Planet is here to melt your mind and, for a while, melt the patience of censors. While its full release came in 1973, unfinished festival versions of René Laloux's Alien Odyssey started showing up at European animation events in the late 60s. That's when the trouble started. If you've never seen it, imagine a universe where humans are tiny, naked, and enslaved by gigantic blue aliens. Then add in hallucinogenic visuals, anti-authoritarian undertones, and a healthy dose of existential dread. In the US South and behind the Iron Curtain, the reaction was instant. Halt this madness. American Bible Belt censors saw naked cartoon humans and started clutching pearls. Eastern European officials saw rebellion and said, "Nayet." The result? Festival organizers pulled the film. Police raided underground screenings, and the legend of Fantastic Planet grew. For every place that banned it, another gave it a standing ovation. Animators and sci-fi fans whispered about it like it was forbidden fruit, a cartoon so weird it might just rearrange your brain. And they were right. Fantastic Planet showed that animation could be political, trippy, and dangerous. Turns out, nothing freaks out censors faster than a naked, thinking cartoon human fighting for freedom. Fritz the Cat, 1969. Here comes the king of animated controversy. Fritz the Cat didn't officially hit theaters until the early 1970s, but underground reels and work prints were making the rounds on college campuses and in counterculture circles as early as 1969. And let's just say, it didn't take long for the ban hammer to come crashing down. Picture this. Ralph Bakshi's magnum opus is loaded with everything your parents hoped cartoons would never have. Sex, drugs, police violence, and razor-sharp satire aimed at race, politics, and authority. For conservative college admins and small-town police, this wasn't just adult animation. It was a full-blown threat to decency. Screenings were busted by cops, projectors were confiscated, and in some states, you could catch a charge just for having a copy. The more officials tried to clamp down, the more the legend of Fritz spread. Word of mouth and midnight showings turned him into a counterculture hero, if you could find him. University students swapped battered reels and staged secret showings, all while authorities fumed about the dangerous influence of cartoons gone wild. Looking back, Fritz the Cat didn't just push the boundaries, it bulldozed them, and the censors never stood a chance. The lesson? Try to ban a cartoon this outrageous, and all you do is make it even more irresistible. The Wonderful World of Puss and Boots, 1969. And for our final act, meet the swashbuckling feline who found himself exiled by Sunday school teachers. Toei Animation's The Wonderful World of Puss and Boots was a Japanese hit and family favorite, unless you lived in certain ultra-conservative pockets of America and Western Europe. Here's the deal. This wasn't just a fairy tale about a clever cat. Puss gets involved in battles, chases, and a few scenes with magical transformations. Plus, there's a whiff of devilish mischief that religious groups found a little too spicy. In the US, some church-based broadcasters flat out refused to show it, denouncing the occult themes, mockery of tradition, and gasp, cartoon violence. In the UK, certain local boards called it unsuitable for young viewers because, apparently, clever cats and capes were just too much for the fragile British psyche. Of course, banning it only added to its legend. Bootleg VHS tapes made the rounds, and kids everywhere started wondering what was so dangerous about a talking cat in boots. The irony? It's now considered a classic, a masterwork of 1960s Japanese animation that inspired generations. If you ever doubted that a cartoon cat could rattle the establishment, think again. In the end, Puss in Boots proved that all it takes is a little attitude and a lot of curiosity to get yourself banned. So, there you have it. 15 animated movies from the 1960s that were so bold, so bizarre, or just so ahead of their time, the censors couldn't handle it. What does it say about us that some of the most dangerous films in history are cartoons? Drop your jaw, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you want more untold stories from the wild side of film history. Remember, what gets banned today might just be tomorrow's masterpiece. What would you ban or bring back?